Paul. How are you?
I'm fabulous.
Yay! I love that energy on this Wednesday. I'm so excited to be here with you. For anybody watching who does not know, Paul Zimmerman is my absolute hero when it comes to gardening and roses. Like everything I know or have learned about growing roses is directly from all of his amazing content on YouTube and Facebook and his website and his amazing book. Do you want to hold it up for us, Paul? Just gorgeous. I just got a copy. So exciting. Very pumped to be here. So, Paul, I really wanted to chat about rose care in summer because my garden is on the struggle bus. I'm sure a lot of people watching, their garden is maybe in the same boat. How's your garden doing right now?
My garden looks awful.
That makes me feel so much better.
I've always wanted to be honest with the people that I talk to, and particularly with gardeners, because when you're an expert, everything's supposed to be perfect.
Right.
Not a black spot in sight, not an insect in sight.
Right.
And what it is, Katie Rose, what's going on? It's summertime. I live in the upstate of South Carolina, so the northwest corner of the state, excuse me, and it's August. It's hot. It's humid. The roses in particular, and I think this is the thing people don't understand. We're told that, this rose blooms all season. Well, yeah, if the weather's exactly right, then it probably will. But when it gets hot and it gets humid, they almost shut down a little bit and go semi-dormant. And so the fact that your roses are kind of sleeping, maybe the blooms are smaller, they're probably lighter in color. You've probably got less foliage, a little more disease present than normal. If any of this sounds familiar, raise your hand. Yeah. And that's what I have as well. Now, keep in mind, I'm a chemical-free garden. I'm sustainable. I'm organic in this garden. So that's to be expected that the roses in the summertime are going to go downhill a little bit. And if you want, we can talk about some things you can be doing now and take advantage of that moment.
Absolutely. And also Wes has joined us from Jackson Perkins. Wes, so excited to have you on the live today. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I just feel like I need to pull in the big guns here to get some help with my garden. So I hope I'm not alone with everybody watching. Paul, I'm so glad that you mentioned lighter in color because we've talked before that people will, be disappointed if a color isn't exactly the way that it looked like online. They've seen a single photo of it and they maybe, it doesn't present exactly like that. Where, of course, we know anybody who grows roses, no two roses look the same, even on the same plant. But can you talk a little bit more about a lighter color, like you just mentioned?
Yeah, because what it is that you've got two things. The sun is more intense. And that could be climate as well. Like you're in Texas, for example, and you can grow a rose in Texas. And then, for example, someone can grow the same rose in Minnesota, for example, and they're going to be different colors. The one up north is going to be a little bit darker. I see roses here and I see roses when I do my garden tours in places like England. And there's a different coloration because the light is different. Then when you add summer and you add that intense sunlight, that's also going to change the color a little bit. And the blooms will be a tad smaller because they have less time to open. In the spring, they can open slowly because of the climate. In the summer, they just go, whoa, I'm opening now.
Yeah, it's like a blink and you miss it. I swear, if I don't check my garden every couple hours, I miss a bloom. I did want to mention, too, we are going to do some giveaways today. We are giving away 2 Jackson Perkins roses during this live of your choice. So just comment and ask us a rose question to enter the contest. So drop your rose questions in there while we're talking. Now, guys, I wanted to know, actually, first, Susan has a great question here. She asks, when your roses are dormant, should you prune them or just let them be?
That's great minds think alike. I went right to that question as well. Yeah. So here's what to do. So when I say dormant in the summertime, I don't mean winter dormant. I don't mean, they just shut down completely. What they do is they go to sleep a little bit, I think is the way that I would look at it. So what I do in the summertime, where I live, I have Japanese beetles, so that's another advantage. When they start to go dormant a little bit, I go into them and I trim them out and prune them back a little bit. They've gone through their spring flush. They put out an enormous amount of growth. There's probably some dead canes in there. I'll bring them back by about a third, shake them up a little bit, take the dead canes out. And I do that while the Japanese beetles are here because the Japanese beetles are drawn to your garden by fragrance. They smell the flowers. So if you're trimming your roses and getting rid of all the flowers, that's also going to lessen the Japanese beetle. So don't use the word prune, but it's a good summer haircut is the word that I would use. So great question, Susan. Thank you.
That was great. We've already got so many good questions rolling in here. Okay, we're going to go to Miss Kay Keller Hunt, who's just arrived, and she wants to know, have we developed a rose rosette resistant variety?
No.
What was maybe a good rose to plant if someone is concerned about that, about rose rosette?
There's not enough research yet to truly answer that question. Dr. Mark Wyndham, Dr. Kevin Ong, Dr. David Byrne, and there's a new person at the University of Tennessee. They're doing research. They are finding some species roses that seem to have some resistance. They're trying to break down the genome. I know I'm getting a little wonky here, but that's what the rest is trying to do. And no rose is more or less susceptible to rose rosette disease. They all can get it at some point. The key to rose rosette disease is if you get it, it's knowing what to do about it. It's like any disease that you can get. But there's no real resistant variety. No one's really willing to state that. They're trying to go there, like they're working on black spot, and there's some Texas A&M is doing some DNA work to try to figure that stuff out, but we're not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully soon. It is fairly new for anybody who did not know. It's maybe 10 years?
It's actually been, I dove into this, a deep dive into rose rosette disease about a year and a half or 2 years ago with Dr. Mark Wyndham, Dr. David Byrne, and Dr. Kevin Ong, and I did an hour-long interview on 3 of them on my YouTube channel. And it's called busting the myths of rose rosette disease. There's a lot of disinformation and scary information out there.
And you have such great clips of the canes of the roses, which I found very helpful.
Yeah, we really broke it down. So, it's actually been around since the 30s. It started in California, believe it or not.
The 30s.
It's been around a long time. Goodness. Yeah, and it's just recently really come into more of the forefront. I live in rose rosette bullseye country. I've had it. I've lost more roses to winter kill. Over the years, I don't fret about it if I get it. I just do what I've learned the protocols, and there's a lot more information about what to do. It's not about being afraid of it. It's about being proactive if it comes into your garden. And the first thing really, if you see rose rosette disease, get the plant out of your garden as fast as possible. Put a garbage bag over it, whatever, because you don't want the mites to blow off into other roses. It's a very specific mite. The mite cannot fly. The mite is blind. And the mite can only live on a rose.
Interesting.
A couple things to keep in mind. So if the mite gets into your garden, it can't fly to another rose. It has to be blown by the wind. So if you get that rose out of there, you get the mites out of there as quickly as possible. The other thing too, it can't outlive on a rose. Barrier plants. So if you're getting rose rosette and it's windborne, it's coming from upwind. So the thing to do is plant maybe an evergreen hedge on the upwind side of your rose garden, because when they land on the hedge, they will die. They cannot live on the hedge.
Interesting.
A lot more information, but I know we have other questions, so I don't want to.
No, that was fantastic. And if someone does take out their one rose with rose rosette to, sacrifice one to save the mini, can they plant a rose in that same spot? Because I see that question a lot on my page.
Yes, I get it a lot too, and there's a lot of information out there. So this is from Dr. Mark Wyndham. The answer is yes. You want to get as much of the old roots out as possible, but you do that with any time you dig out an old plant. But if there's mites in the soil, keeping in mind, they can only live on a host plant, which is a rose. They can't live in the soil. They're going to die. So maybe give them a couple weeks, and then go ahead and plant.
Yeah. So if you see anything in your garden now, go ahead and get that out. And then when it cools down a little bit in the fall, maybe plant a new rose.
Very good tip. Excellent tip.
Okay, Kevin here asks, how far back do you cut dead flowers? Great question, Kevin.
So what I do, Kevin, is I look at deadheading as grooming. I don't, you want to go back to healthy growth. That's the main thing. If you go back to spindly growth, whatever comes out of that cane can't be any bigger than what's already there. So you want to keep that in mind. I go back, I'll go back maybe 5 or 6 inches on a shorter plant. If a plant's gotten really tall and I want to bring it back, I'll go back a foot or two. So I use the deadheading as an opportunity to groom the plant and shape the plant during the season. Now, the only thing to keep in mind is the further down you deadhead, the longer it takes for the new flower to appear. That's not that big a deal. So Don't worry too much about that, Kevin. Worry about getting a bud eye that faces away from the center, so the growth goes this way as opposed to that way. That's important, something like that. But don't worry about the length. Use it as an opportunity to take a look at the plant and go, let me kind of shape that plant up a little bit, and use that to be your guide for deadheading.
I think too, for me, it also depends because so much of gardening depends on my mood. Plum Perfect, for instance, one of my favorite Jackson and Perkins roses, is enormous. It is covered with like 100 blooms at all times. And so I will just go through and deadhead that one so lazy compared to, some of my hybrid teas that maybe have like 5 blooms at a time. And I'll be a lot more careful when I'm deadheading that one. I think people kind of forget that it's also, your garden and it's whatever you have time for at the end of the day.
Sometimes it's just that.
Yes, really. Do as we say, not as we do sometimes. All right.
XBL, what's the name of the mites? It's an aerified mite is what it's called. Yeah, aerified mite. Go to my YouTube channel if you really want to get some more information. Look for that hour-long interview. YouTube, it's just called Paul Zimmerman Roses. And it's an hour-long interview I did about a year and a half ago. The information is very recent. Lots of great video, lots of phenomenal information, science-based information, by the way, not fear-mongering information.
So I would love to present a question myself, actually. My backyard roses look absolutely terrible after a chili thrips infestation, which took me an embarrassingly amount of time to really diagnose. I don't know what other word to use, but I did not know what was going on. I sent pictures to the Jackson Perkins team, said what is going on. It almost looked like Rose Rosette, but it didn't have the witch's broom. But then thanks to Paul's Facebook page, your Facebook group, which is so helpful. And people were sharing all these photos. I was finally able to figure out that it was chili thrips. Which was really good news, bad news, because at least it wasn't Rose Rosette, but it's only a little bit better, I guess. I did immediately bag the roses and cut them so far back. I mean, I did a winter hack. I did my Valentine's Day hack on these roses. And they're actually coming in looking 100% fine now. So can you talk a little bit, either one of you, about chili thrips and maybe what people can do and how devastating is it? Any tips for anybody who might have a similar situation? Obviously, there's other kinds of thrips as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to do some commenting. So thrips in general, they live in the blooms. So you took the old blooms off. That's a good way to go. Mm-hmm. I did look a little up on chili thrips. That you can use things. What is it here? Pyrethroids are effective. One called IMIDACLOPRID. Again, I'm a chemical-free garden, so I don't know familiar with a lot of this stuff. That's a way to help control them as well. There are beneficial predatory mites. When I had my nursery, we used those a lot. We released them, and I had very good luck with that. If you just Google predatory mites, and you can find some mites that you can release. But one of the keys of understanding this is that beneficial insects, by and large, if it's a native insect like a thrip or an aphid, there's a beneficial insect that will go after it for you and help do your job. Japanese beetles do not have a beneficial insect because they're not native to our country. That's a different story. But I'll tell you a little story with thrips, and it applies to chili thrips as well. So I live in an area that gets thrips. About 12 years ago, when I was writing my book, as a matter of fact, there was a bad thrip outbreak in my area. A lot of people were getting thrips, and I had almost none. And I was talking to some friends of mine in the Netherlands, Beer Creek Nursery. It's a European Union certified organic rose nursery. So that's not an easy thing to get in Europe. And they do all beneficials, very educated in this thing. Long story short, what they asked me, they said, did you kill your aphids in the spring? I said, no. And they said, well, that's why you don't have thrips, because you didn't kill your aphids. And my head exploded. So I said, well, explain what you're talking about. They said, here's the deal. It's the life cycle. In my case, it's a hoverfly. That's my beneficial insect that goes after them. Hoverflies, they emerge from dormancy in the spring in my garden. I leave a lot of rough, uncut foliage. That's where they overwinter. The adults come out. They begin to feed on early blooming plants with good nectar, perennials, things along those lines, okay, umbraphelias and things like that. They then lay their eggs when the aphids appear, because their larvae eat aphids. That's what they do, okay? So they eat. Someone said bad audio, so hopefully this will improve it a little bit. So that's what they do essentially. They lay their eggs there. The larvae then deal with a lot of the baby aphids and help control the population that way. The adults will eat them as well. Then they hatch, they become adults, they continue. The next generation eggs is laid in the summertime when the thrips appear, and they lay them in the flowers where the thrips are going to be. So that's the continual life cycle of a beneficial insect, is keeping that involved and keeping it going. We've got a video with Jackson Perkins called Building a Host Environment for Beneficial Insects. Goes into a lot of detail about all this stuff. But there are some chemical controls, but try to see if you can get some beneficial insects going. That's a really good way to help. Like I said, I've not used an insecticide on this property in 24 years. I get some aphids. I get some aphid damage. I rarely have thrip damage. I rarely have damage from insects because I let the beneficials take care of it.
I love that. It's such an inspiration to me to hear you talk about all of this. Leslie asks, is it okay to fertilize now, mid-August? Leslie, I do have a follow-up question for you, which is, what are you fertilizing? But take it away, Paul or Wes.
Well, typically, this time of year in most of the country, as Paul was talking about, roses are semi-dormant, and just because of the heat. So I live in the deep south, and this time of year is a little early to fertilize. I like to let things sit dormant until around the 1st of September. I give them a boost of an organic fertilizer that I work well into the soil around the base of the plant, and I give them a little cutback at the same time, and then that promotes good nutrients for a fall flush, which I'm really looking forward to.
Excellent. Dennis says that he recently purchased a home and inherited 14 rose bushes from the old owners, and they've been neglected for about 10 years. Dennis, if they are still going with neglect, you've got yourself some good roses, so you're going to be in good shape.
Totally agree. Yeah, give them a good prune. That would be, I would suggest.
Yeah, good prune. I love, make sure that you have a good feed program, I would say, especially at the start of the season. Paul, do you want to quickly run through just a couple fertilizer tips?
Yeah, I generally like, for the homeowner, don't make it too complicated. I like a time release granular. Osmocote comes to mind. Wes, we have a product on the website as well, correct?
Yes, Dynamite Select is a rose
Select
fertilizer, balanced season long.
Yeah, that's a great thing to put down in spring and maybe late summer. It's a good thing for that. And we have Sea Magic. Is that our seaweed-based product?
Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
I use that every 3 to 4 weeks on my roses and my vegetables, and they have never been sweeter. Love it.
Yeah, if you do do like a time release product in the spring, after you see about 2 or 3 inches of new growth, go ahead and put a time release granular down. Do that again in late summer for the fall. And then do like about every 3 weeks, like you're doing something like a Sea Magic or seaweed-based fertilizer. That's a good all-around fertilizing program that's not going to make it too intense and too crazy and too insane for you. Yeah, I'd like to jump into one, if you don't mind. Cindy Lance, what organic methods do you use on controlling Japanese beetles? This is an important topic. This is really, a lot of advances have come around recently. So again, I mentioned Japanese beetles, no natural predator, so there's no beneficial insect. Ducks like them. I mean, okay, and some birds, but that means, I don't know if you want to keep a lot of ducks in your garden. But basically,
I could be talked into it.
Yeah, I could too. Yeah. The traditional thing is there's some chemical insecticides. I won't use the name. One of them sounds like a number. It's pretty lethal. There's a new or biological control, or more organic type control. It's called BTG. B as in boy, T as in Tom, G as in George. I'm going to butcher this. It's Bacillus thuringiensis gallerii. And it's a BT product. And basically what happens with BT products, when the insect you want it to go for consumes it, it basically kills them from within. BTG only kills Japanese beetles and maybe 1 or other 2 kinds of harmful beetles. It does not harm beneficials. How do I know this? I've used it for 3 years in my garden. I heard about this product. I ordered it. I used it for 3 years straight because I don't want to talk about something unless I can prove it. I had almost no Japanese beetles this year. That's from this product. And there's a product to treat it, the grubs, when they're in the lawn. Then you can treat it when you're on the plant. That's a wettable powder. And again, something you sprinkle on the lawn when the rain comes, or water it in after they go to ground. It's kind of a long cycle. I've done some videos, but BTG, look that up. I will swear it works. I know it works because I was quite astonished at how much my population has been reduced, and I've been able to control it. Doesn't mean I don't get some, but it's under control.
Amazing.
Yeah, I want to make sure we answered that one.
Absolutely. Kathy has a great question. She asked, can potted roses be shielded temporarily during high heat of over 100 degrees?
Absolutely. The great thing about potted roses is that hopefully they're mobile. The roses love that early morning sun. So in hotter climates, after lunch, 1 or 2 o'clock, they don't get as much benefit from that hot afternoon sun, and they can be shielded from that and not have any negative effects.
Wes, do you guys still have some good roses for specifically bred for pots at Jackson Perkins?
Yes, you go onto our site and you can go into the roses and you can actually click on roses that are good for containers or decorative containers.
I need to get more into that. I really just do not have any of my roses in pots. They're all in the ground, so I can't really speak to it. But I really need to do that.
I think if you just did one thing right, that would be to have as large a pot as you possibly can, because once it gets hot, that soil gets hot. It's hard to keep cool. But 15-gallon or larger, I like to see roses in. I know that's not always possible for everybody, but big soil mass helps.
Yeah, it does.
Barbara asks, should you cut back roses when you fertilize in September that was planted just this year?
Sure, there's no problem with that. In fact, I'm planning on doing that here coming up in the next 15 to 30 days. Shear them for shape or clean them up like Paul was mentioning, get any dead out of it. But just cut them back a few inches or a little more depending on the size, and it will promote new blooms to develop.
Yeah,
Paul has a really cool thing he talks about with roses and perennials. What do you talk about, that summer shearing?
Yeah, I do, because I use summer to set my roses up for fall, because I talked about the fact they're not particularly doing much. So I'm thinking, okay, I want to cut them back like Susan talked about, no more than a third. That's my rule of thumb. Cut out dead wood, but that's thin wood, twiggy wood, stuff along those lines. Get rid of that. But what's the star in my garden in the summertime are actually my summer blooming perennials. Because I have perennials and roses all together. I like mixing everything up, and also the beneficial insects like those perennials. So there's an advantage there. And I talked about barrier plants with rosette disease, the Euryphoid mite. Well, again, if it's on a rose and it blows and hits my echinacea, it's going to die before it gets to the rose on the other side of the echinacea. A lot of things going on. So my color in the summertime is actually my summer blooming perennials. That's what's blooming right now. Rudbeckia, echinacea, Caryopsis is about to start blooming. That's what I love to see blooming in the summertime. And the roses go to sleep, and I still have a lot of color, but I'm setting the roses up for fall.
My zinnias are really holding down the fort right now. For me, color-wise, zinnias do very well in the heat. If anybody needs a good summer flower, and they're very easy to grow from seeds as well.
I would recommend to anybody that's growing roses, no matter what the setup is, whether it's in a foundation planting or a postage stamp garden, or in a pot, to start incorporating perennials. I mean, I think that's where the host, beneficial insects, your whole expectations are just so broadened, because as those roses go downhill, as they will in the summer, no matter how much work you do to them, those perennials will come on, and I'll tell you, you won't care as much how the roses look, and you won't be as concerned about some of these things that everybody is so concerned about. And then you can cut them back, and then when fall comes, you have a great new showing for roses.
Yeah, here in Dallas, it just amazes me. Last year I had roses still literally on New Year's Day. That was a record, but I very often have roses still through Christmas. And I feel like people, very much associate roses with spring and summer, but at least down here, in the Sun Belt, we've got roses in the fall. And I always tell my mom I want to do so much garden party content in October, because that is, to me, like the premier rose month here in Texas. So I've not given up hope for, no matter how bad it looks in August, I know they're going to rally for fall.
Yeah, I'm the same way. October, my roses are going to be beautiful again.
Yes.
The perennials will fade back a little bit. The asters will kick in, but the roses will fade back a little bit. But the roses will be the star in October.
So let's talk a little bit about companion plants for roses then. Obviously, we talk a lot about roses when we're talking Jackson and Perkins, but Jackson Perkins offers tons of other plants that are not just roses. So what are your guys' top recommendations for what to plant with roses, and maybe what absolutely to never plant near roses? I would say to never plant trees near roses. So many people, so
The
many of
other
my
one I'd
friends
advise
will
never
plant
plant
roses.
morning
Like,
glory near a rose.
yeah,
Nothing invasive. That would be the rule of thumb.
yes.
So from a design standpoint, when I design a garden for a client with roses, I'm looking for perennials that are not invasive. Obviously, that's the main thing. Then I'm looking for contrasts. So what do I mean by contrast? Contrast in color, contrast in foliage shape, contrast in growth habit. Those are the three things I'm after. So roses, by and large, I'm being general here. There's obviously exceptions. They basically have, a green leaf and a shrubby type structure. Obviously, there's climbers, and I realize there's exceptions, but essentially the foliage is fairly similar from rose to rose to rose. Okay, we'll use that as a sort of a general statement here. So what am I looking for then? Well, I'm looking for maybe silver foliage, because there's no roses with silver foliage. Lavender, Russian sage, lamb's ears, things like that really do well with roses. So there's something you can go for. Roses, by and large, have a round shape, so I want an upright shape. Foxglove, delphinium, echinacea that I talked about, stalky, upright kind of shape. Now I'm getting a contrast going there is what's happening with that. That's important. The other thing is anything with the color blue, because there's no such thing as a blue rose. There's shades that get close, but they're not really blue. So go for contrast, color, shape, and growth habit. And here's a neat little tip that I learned a number of years ago. Very easy to do with a smartphone, okay? When your garden's in full bloom, perennials, roses, spring, it's an absolute stunning bloom. Whatever you got going on, go out, take a few pictures with your phone, convert them to black and white. If it's still interesting in black and white, you're onto something. If it's not, you need more texture and contrast in shape, color, and texture.
What a fun tip. I love that.
Yeah, it's a phone taught to me, and I do it. And I look at my garden, I went, well, I thought it was nice. Now it's not.
That's so funny. By the way, speaking of texture and black and white, I saw a photo on your Facebook page of a wooden obelisk in your garden. Showed it to my dad. He immediately built one for me and my mom. So thank you for that. Adds a lot. Gotta love a little art in the garden.
Yeah, well, that also takes the garden vertical.
Yes, absolutely.
Contrast, all contrast.
Yes. And then Wes, you actually have a way on Jackson Perkins for people to easily shop companion plants too, right?
Sure. You go on, you click on perennials, and then there's a drop down for companion plants or rose companions.
Awesome. Okay, somebody wanted to know ahead of time before our live. They submitted some questions and they wanted to know top tips for yellow leaves and black spot prevention and control. I definitely struggle with black spot myself pretty much every single April, May, but don't fret because it is doable. For me personally, I love neem oil. I spritz it on in the evenings because it can like burn in the Texas sun if you put it on earlier in the day. But I found that to be extremely helpful to just do, a little treatment, a spritz of neem oil on the roses. Do you guys have more tips for black spot?
Yeah, I think that, before you get into the rose garden, you need to define your interest level. You need to define how much time you're willing to put in the garden. You need to define how much space you want to allocate to it, and how much you want to be involved in using chemicals to maintain your garden. And then you could back from there and start selecting varieties of roses that are more resistant to diseases. You can incorporate perennials, and like Paul was saying before, he's had his garden for 20 years and he's selected varieties and companion plants that work together to reduce his insects and reduce his disease issues. And I know that, we say the same things over and over sometimes, but I promise you that if you plant perennials, vegetables, annuals in with your roses, it's just not going to be as big a concern to you if you get a black spot here or there. Or even a third of the plant or a fourth of the plant gets black spot.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the most important thing to understand about black spot, it's okay if your roses get black spot.
Right.
No
Such a
one's going
good
to come
point.
take your secateurs away. You're not going to lose your membership in the Rose Society because you got some black spot. You know, we all get sick every now and then. It's
Right.
normal for roses to get some disease. So that's the first thing to understand.
Mhm.
Like now we talk about now in the summertime. If you got some black spot, that's normal. Okay, it's
Mhm.
okay to have some black spot on your roses. As Wes was saying, you know, I select disease-resistant varieties.
Mhm.
Disease-resistant, not disease-proof. That doesn't exist. There are varieties that are more disease-resistant than others, particularly for my climate. That's where local information really comes in helpful. That's where Facebook groups come in helpful. For example, you know, you can say, "I live in this area. What roses do well for you?" That's good information. So that's the initial aspect to do it. A good fertilizing program. We talked about that earlier. Like a human being, the healthier we are, the better we can ward off disease. Not too dissimilar from plants.
Mhm.
A good healthy living soil is important as well for something like that. Then with treatments, there's two things to understand. There's two things. There's preventatives and there's eradicants. The preventative helps the rose from getting the disease in the first place. Neem oil, which, for example, that you're using.
Mhm.
That's a good way to go with that. That's the preventative. Now, what do you do when it shows up? That's the eradicant part. What's going to help suppress the disease and suppress the spores before they actually show up? We used to be able to buy lime sulfur in this country. You can't anymore. But any copper-based fungicide, say it again, copper-based fungicide will help deal with the disease once it shows up. I keep some. Maybe you can put it in a Windex bottle or something like that. You know, and if
Mhm.
you see the disease on a rose, go ahead and spray that rose and spray the leaves around it. That and while the leaves will not magically cure and become all green again, it will prevent the black
Mhm.
spot from spreading somewhere else.
Mhm.
Lastly, the best defense if you got a rose that constantly gets black spot, because remember that black spot can move. If you got one that constantly gets black spot and all the time, the best thing you can do, well, you know what? Go grab a shovel.
I do love that you're so willing to take out a high maintenance rose because
Yeah,
my garden, it is Game of Thrones. It's like you can't be, I work long hours. You
yeah.
gotta be a little hardier than that.
You do, and but a lot of it's also, you know, what do you want out of your rose? Like for an exhibitor, for example, they have to put the
Yeah.
time, have to put the effort in, and they're some of the
Mhm.
hardest working rose peat growers out there. The exhibitors that are out there. It's
Mhm.
not it's not that it doesn't interest me. It's just not something I want. I like the general
Mhm.
gardening aspect of it. I'm willing to live with some disease, but I'm not willing to live with a rose that just gets disease on a constant basis. And also, that doesn't mean it's not a bad rose. That doesn't mean it's a bad rose. That means it's not a good rose for my area. It might do really well for somebody else somewhere else.
And it should be noted too that just because a rose has, black spot one month doesn't mean it's not cute the rest of the year. And there's such a huge difference. I mean, my Peggy Martin has never seen a single ounce of black spot in
Yeah.
all the years that I've had her. But Sentimental for me is one of my favorite roses. It's probably all of my readers' favorite roses. It's the showy one, if you guys are watching, and has like the stripes on it. It's very dramatic looking. That is the most finicky rose in my entire
Yeah.
garden, and it gets the worst black spot every single season. And it looks bad for like 1 month, but first, I have like probably 6 to 8 weeks of it looking really stunning, and then it always gets black spot. Looks terrible May and June, end of May and June. And it looks great again by fall. So just because you have black spot doesn't mean that it's just gonna like look terrible for the rest of the year. And it's such a spectacular rose in every other way, and scent and looks and everything, that I don't mind working a little bit harder for that rose.
A lot
We
of
all have
roses
that road. Go ahead,
Sorry.
Wes.
sorry, a lot of roses are bred on the West Coast, especially in Southern California,
Mhm.
and their genetics are adapted to that area. There are roses that are regionally adapted to the Northwest or to the Northeast. And just like everybody's been saying, just because it doesn't do well in your area doesn't mean that it's not going to do well other places.
And you do want to look at the zones, guys, when you're shopping. It's so nice. Jackson Perkins has it right there on the website where you can literally filter it by your zone. So definitely pay attention to your garden zone when you're buying a rose.
This
Or
is a great place to me for a plug for the American Rose Society. If you're new to gardening and you've never really done roses before, there's people typically in your area that have grown roses for generations and can get you off to a fast start. Join your local Rose Society, and it'll save you a lot of time. It's a great resource.
Yeah, public gardens are also a great source. A lot of public gardens are going off chemicals. I'm actually involved with two of them now. I'm taking them from chemicals to sustainable. and working with them on that. And so go to a public garden and ask, do you guys use chemicals? And they say, no, we don't use fungicides or something like that. Start writing down names, the ones that look good, that's what's going to do well. Regional information is really important when it comes to roses, that because we're such a huge country. You can say a rose does well in England. Okay. But, England's what, half the size of Florida. So that's a key to understanding, regional information is the best. And like Wes said, American Rose Society has local chapters. What a resource.
Absolutely.
And this is really the golden age of roses. I mean, the last 20 years, maybe 15 years, we have better genetics. We have more breeders. We have more varieties that are disease resistant. The term exceptionally disease resistant has become prominent over the last few years. And you can get varieties that require very little, if any, care other than, maintaining a quality soil and having a beneficial insects.
For everybody watching, don't forget to comment for a chance to win your very own Jackson & Perkins roses. Comment, let us know what your rose questions are. We're going to have a few minutes left still to get those entries in to win some roses. So let us know what questions you have. We did just get a new question in by Evelyn. Wants to know what causes the rose blooms to be smaller?
The number one thing I think of is the heat. Then after that, you start looking at the quality of soil, your fertilization process, the way you prune your roses. But a lot of roses will lose their bloom size as the weather gets hotter in the summer.
So interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
Also, we are, Paul, will you hold your book up for us one more time?
Sure.
We are also giving away a copy of Paul's book, very special because he's going to sign it for one of our lucky contest winners, Everyday Roses by Paul Zimmerman. So exciting. So we're going to give away the book as well as 2 Jackson & Perkins roses. So comment and let us know. Karina wants to know, she says, deer have been eating my roses and I see there's many holes on the leaves. Do you guys have any tips to keep deer away from roses?
I don't know any deer that make holes in the roses. I call deer pruners. I mean, they come in and just take the tops off, and just about the time the blooms are at their peak, it seems they love them. Yeah. And I've seen them do it in the city, and I've seen them do it in the countryside. It's not unique, but Paul and I worked on a few projects that include everything from fences to actually applying chemicals to the leaves to reject deer. I think one of the things we came up with is, change it up. Don't always do the same thing all the time.
Yeah, deer they're creatures of habit. You can get the motion sensor sprinklers that kind of work. The product that I've heard that works fairly well, the one that seems to come up a lot is a product called Plant Skid. So plant, the word plant, SKIDD. Just Google it. You can get it almost anywhere. That's the only consistent one that people say. And again, you have to keep applying it. You want to mix things up, do a bunch of different stuff. But I've heard that seems to be the one that most people say, seems to actually have some effect.
And it's really, like I said earlier, is, change it up. Deer are really bright sometimes. They manipulate the environment to maximize their diet. So things do have to change. You can't just do the same thing all the time.
Yeah.
Christy wants to know if we have any tips for planting bare roots because hers always die. Can we first run through just what that means to even get a bare root rose and plant a bare root rose compared to like what you might find in a nursery?
Bare root roses are available in the early winter, spring months of the year all over the country. They are just what they're called. They have no pot and no soil, and they come to you tops and roots. To me, roses aren't magic. They typically freeze to death, dry out. But if your bare roses aren't taking off, it's usually one of those two things. There's a simple test when you receive your roses. You scratch just the surface of it with your finger. And if it's bright and green underneath there, it can be, it's alive and doing well. Rose stems can be anywhere from dark brown to bright red to bright green and still be completely healthy. So hydration, the first thing I do when I get a bare root rose is unpack it and soak it in water for, a day or two. And by that, I mean the roots part of it. The second thing I do when I plant a bare root rose is I water it in as I'm planting it. I add soil, I water it, I add soil and water it. That keeps you from dealing with any pockets of air in the soil, because roots naturally prune themselves when they reach air pockets. So keep them hydrated and keep them watered in as you're planting them. Also, in the early, or not early spring, but later in the season, they can dry out. So, keep them moist, not soppy wet, but just keep them moist once they're planted during the season.
Yeah, one thing you can do when you plant it at first is, in addition to everything that Wes is saying, is take some compost or some mulch or something, kind of mound it around the bare root to keep those canes moist. And when you start to see new growth, then you kind of peel it back a little bit. Now, I've also found, like, I've gardened in Los Angeles. That's where I gardened initially. I could put bare root straight in the ground, not too much trouble. Now I'm in the South Carolina red clay, heavy red clay. I have actually had better success if I take the bare root rose and I pot it up first.
Interesting.
And I'll put it in like a 3-gallon or 5-gallon pot, and I'll put it in a place where it gets good morning sun, maybe some afternoon shade, and I'll let it go till it gets a really good, solid, big root system. I seem to have better success in my soil just doing it. And I don't have any, scientific evidence, but that's just observation. When I put bare roots straight in the ground, and my soil is well amended, by the way. I just seem where I live, they seem to be happier if I put them in a pot first. So the person whose roses are dying, I would try that. Put them in a pot, let it, and I'm thinking 3 or 4 months. Let them get really big, like they were at a garden center, and then stick them in the ground.
Great tip.
Also, you're not going to like this, but cut them back when you get them. They're 13 inches, 18 inches long. Cut them back to 4 to 5 or 6 inches above that graft union or above where the soil was on an own root plant, and you'll promote a lot more bud breaks and a much fuller plant once it starts to break.
Yeah, rule of thumb is roots first, top second. Keep that in mind, folks. So think about your fertilizers in a like a 10-10-10. The first one's nitrogen. You don't want to be, that's top growth. You don't want to be feeding top growth when you're trying to establish a root system. Get a root system going first. Work on that one. There's one I'd like to pick up real quickly because I think it's because we kind of talked about. But Alice Johnson's asking, I live in the north. Is it now too late to fertilize my roses? No, it's not too late, Alice, but don't use a time release if you've got winter coming on pretty quickly. Use a general, rose tone or something along those lines. Again, we've got some good fertilizers on the Jackson Perkins website. Try to use something that's not a time release. You can continue with the Sea Magic. That's absolutely fine. If you can find out when your last frost date is, or your first frost date, excuse me, in the fall, sometimes you can Google it by zip code. Count back 6 weeks, stop fertilizing.
We have an Espoma rose tone,
that's perfect,
organic fertilizer that can be sprinkled around the base of the plant 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost is expected, worked into the soil. And that's a real soft, gentle organic fertilizer that'll move it into fall and not have it be too tender when the first freeze comes.
Yeah, that's not a time release, so it won't be pumping out fertilizer all the way in the winter. It's just a nice shot. Again, we're setting them up for fall right now. That's what we're doing. Think less about summer and think more about what's going to happen in the fall.
Buzz wants to know, is a ground cover rose the same as a dwarf or a miniature rose?
No, they're different forms of roses. Miniature roses can grow upright, typically, 1 to 2 feet. It could have blooms that have single petals. It can have traditional hybrid tea appearance, miniature blooms, as to where a ground cover typically grows up and spreads out across the ground. There are ground covers, again, that, grow in multiple colors and multiple bloom patterns. And, I'm embarrassed to say this, but ground covers are some of my favorite roses. They can hang over a wall. They can grow out of a pot. They can drape out of a hanging basket. It just doesn't have to be sitting there in the garden.
Yeah, very versatile kind of roses, ground cover roses. That's as Wes just said. Great tips, Wes, for ways to grow them. Hanging baskets, they're stunning as hanging baskets.
I have never tried that, and now I want to. That sounds absolutely amazing.
They weep.
For everybody, one of the questions before we started our live was, how late is too late to plant in the fall, to plant a new rose in the fall? If you're out in the garden center, you see something beautiful, or you want to order from Jackson and Perkins. I know it obviously depends where you are, but generally speaking, the north and the south, what would you say is too late to plant in the fall?
It's hard to stick a pin in that because seasons vary all over the country, and also in that specific part of the country, it varies from year to year. But I would say, 6 weeks before your first frost is anticipated is kind of a rule of thumb. But what's amazing is that planting in the fall is an excellent time to plant new roses if you live in some of the higher zones, like maybe 6 and higher, because that root growth that Paul was talking about is what we're after. And planting them in the fall gets you a jump on the spring, and your plants just scream out of the ground in the spring if they've got a good root system developed in the fall.
Yeah, exactly.
That's my personal favorite time to plant for that reason, because I'm concerned about drought. So I want as much lead time as I can get for getting plants established before a drought the next summer.
Exactly. You live in Texas. It's the perfect time. I mean, get a little bit below freezing. The roses are going to die from that. But, you can go from spring kind of nice temperatures. You can go to like blazing hot in 3 weeks. And that's a lot of stress on a new plant. If you put it in the fall and let it settle in for the entire winter, by the time that next summer comes around and it's hot and you have a drought, for example, the rose is already established. Fall, even where I live in the upstate of South Carolina, Zone 7, I love fall planting. Absolutely love it.
If you have that system that Paul was talking about, again, you can pot up roses as long as you can protect them, from winter, but you can, get them, very late in the fall and put them in a pot as long as they're protected, and then they'll develop and, have that jump on spring.
Yeah, if you have them potted and you're going to get really cold, just put them in an unheated building like a garage or a shed.
I know we've talked a little bit about this throughout the live, but do you guys have just a recap for anyone joining us now on how to help roses this time of year? What should people do, this week, next week, to help their roses kind of get through the hottest part of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would go back to what we kind of touched on as we go along. We're setting our roses up for fall right now. We know in a hot, humid climate, which even when I lived in Chicago, summer can be that way. The roses are going to go to sleep a little bit. So, trim them back maybe by about a third, clean up dead growth, obviously, thin growth, twiggy growth, check your mulch levels, make sure your mulch levels are pretty decent. If you have a pH meter, check your pH of your soil just to see if your soil's doing okay. Those are the things that I would advise you do. Obviously, keep them hydrated, but sometimes when it gets really hot and they go semi-dormant, they actually need less water than they do in the spring when they're pushing blooms. So be aware of that. Be aware of what's going on with that. But basically, say, okay, you've given me a great spring. You nailed it. You bloomed your head off. You were phenomenal. You gave me everything you've got. Go take a little break. I'm going to clean you up. I'm going to give you a little groom again, and then I'm going to put you back outside.
I wish I could just, nap for the hottest parts of the month too.
Oh, I'd love to nap.
Come back, refresh for fall. Wouldn't that be grand?
Yeah, it would be.
What else do we have here? I'm just checking all of our questions, make sure if we missed anything. I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat here. Let's see. Oh, we had one question: how to care for and train climbing roses. Any training tips?
Yeah, basically with climbing roses, and there's another one here I want to go to a little bit too. Climbing roses. Couple basic things you need to understand. I've got quite a few videos on my YouTube channel about this. 2 kinds of canes on a climbing rose. Okay, main cane. That's the one that comes from the base. That forms the structure of the plant. Okay, they're very long, 8, 10, 12, 14 feet, depending on the variety you have. That's your main cane. That's the growth you generally see in year 1. What comes off the main cane then are side shoots. They're also called laterals, is another word for it. That's what bears the flowers. Okay, that's the 2 things to remember. That. The other thing to remember, the climbing rose. If you train any rose straight up, it's only going to bloom on top. If you train it from a horizontal to a 45-degree angle, okay, I call that the bloomerama zone. What's going to happen is those laterals along the cane, those buds along that main cane are going to break, and produce a boatload of laterals, and you're going to get showers and showers of flowers. So again, what's a main cane? Know the difference between a main cane and a lateral. Train it horizontally as possible, or 45 degrees. If you're going up a trellis, wrap it this way, back and forth, snake it back and forth, all right? Something like that. And the other thing is, never, ever prune a main cane back hard. A climbing rose needs energy to grow and get to mature size. Then it flowers. Climbing roses is a 3-year commitment. Sleep, creep, leap. So those are the little basic tips for climbing roses.
Awesome. Okay, we've got a couple new questions coming in here. Let's see.
There was one about, I saw it earlier, about how do I tell the difference between the rose and a sucker? Yeah, so basically, let's explain a little bit about Wes. Do you want to talk a little bit about how does the sucker come about and what is it?
Yes. When you have a grafted rose, it is a species for the roots and or not a species, but a variety for the roots and a variety for the top. So they're two different plants. So sometimes what can happen is the rootstock will emerge. Sometimes when the top freezes back or dies, that rootstock will come up. And most of the time in this country, it's probably Dr. Huey. It's a single, ready, dark pink looking shoot that usually shoots up a long cane like a climber would.
Yeah, Dr. Huey only blooms in the spring, so that's something to keep in mind. So if you've got this long cane coming up, and it's not blooming, that's probably going to be Dr. Huey. But you can also wait till it blooms, and if it's a dark, like Wes said, single or semi-double red bloom, that's Dr. Huey. You can also do this. So with a grafted rose, there's a thing called a bud union. That's this knot where the canes are coming out of here, and then the root system's below it. All right, is that making sense so far? All right, so take this cane, this sucker, for lack of a better word. If it's coming from the bud union, it's the cane that you want. If that sucker, I know the light's not great here, apologize, folks. If the sucker is coming from below the bud union and it's coming out of an actual root itself, that's a sucker. So you have to dig down a little bit, but you can just shave it right off right there and snap it off, and that'll get rid of it. But the main thing is the bloom's going to tell you, and the growth habit will probably be very different. But if you're not sure, be patient and wait until it flowers, and then you can identify it for sure.
And just to clarify, definitely remove the suckers.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, they're called suckers because they're putting out top growth from underneath the bud union, which means they're sucking the energy away from the plant that's above the bud union. That's why it's called a sucker. It's not because you got one.
Get those out of the garden when you see them.
It's just, that's just part of the nature.
Tony wants to know, how about when roses are completely defoliated? Do you fix it by pruning more severely?
I think when you start to see roses that are completely defoliated, it's time to do what Paul calls a shovel prune. Once, I know that's cold, but you can spend a lot of effort and time spraying and fertilizing and trimming and whatever, but in the end, it's probably going to have black spot again if it's completely defoliated from black spot. It can vary from season to season. But if you want to keep that garden, you can trim it back, you can fertilize it, you can make sure the area is clean of all debris and dead, so that there is no inoculum, and then, start a spray program that, is a preventative, because you're expecting that rose to get black spot.
Yeah, I would also say, when does it get black spot? We talked about, Katie, you talked about, I can't remember, the sentimental, was that the one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pretty much in our rainiest season, it looks bad,
right.
But usually for like a month.
Yeah, if it's going to be good in spring and it's going to be good in fall, it's going to be not so good in the summertime, then yes, go ahead and prune it back in the summer, like we've been talking about, that summer cleanup. But then plant perennials around it. Let the perennials cover it up in the summertime so you don't see it. And then come fall, then the perennials can die back for the fall and the rose comes back again. That's that interchanging of gardening. Graham Stewart Thomas called it the art of gardening with roses, and that's exactly what it is.
And just like any, whether it's writing or landscaping or sports or whatever, everything has a time. And there's a lot of roses out there that are very popular, that were bred for a specific reason, to have big canes, to be an upright grower, to be a hybrid tea, to have large blooms. And in the early years, there wasn't a lot of consideration for whether it was black spot resistant or powdery mildew resistant. But now there's there's dozens, if not more, roses that are highly bred to be disease resistant. So there's no reason to deal with that if you don't want to deal with it. If you want to have one of these traditional big, beautiful bloomers like Mr. Lincoln, you need to expect to spray that or have it look like it's going to look, like Paul was saying, and add companion plants around it.
Mm-hmm. We just got one more question in. So my roses are struggling in Houston, Texas. This is from Ashley. The leaves are falling off and the blooms are getting burnt. I'm assuming from the sun. I have them in shade. What else can I do?
Yeah. I think, Ashley, this is what we've been talking about. This is just the summer doldrums. I would go ahead and, prune them back by about a third. You can certainly use a fungicide and give them a spraying or a copper spray like I talked about or something along those lines. But, the fact that you live in Houston, Texas, and this is going on with your roses, it's been hot in Texas, it's been dry. It's not a big surprise. I don't think it's anything you're doing wrong. I think it's just this could be this year's cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And again, as you shop for roses, you can find online varieties that are more hardy in arid or humid climates. Unfortunately, Houston is hot and humid.
Yeah.
Ashley, you need Plum Perfect. Never gives me any trouble at all. Or anything marked as a sun-built rose on Jackson and Perkins. There
you go. Perfect. Yes, and that's a great example of regional advice.
Yeah, I think I was working with a customer yesterday in Houston, and they had Belinda's Dream in their garden, and it was fabulous.
Yeah,
absolutely beautiful. Traditional hybrid tea-looking bloom and a floribunda bush that was pink, and taking it. It was even in a rock garden in Houston and doing well.
Wow. Karina wants to know what perennials you suggest that go great with roses. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, but do you guys have just like top 2-3 perennials you love in your gardens?
I like an Agastache Blue Fortune. It ticks a lot of boxes. It's got the blue flower. It's an upright growth habit. It's a pollinator butterfly magnet. I like butterfly bushes and echinacea, and I like Rudbeckia, black-eyed Susans. I love that exuberant shout of orangey yellow in the middle of the summertime. It just lights up the entire place.
Mm-hmm.
Lavender is traditional. I can't grow lavender, sadly. I wish I could. If you can grow lavender and roses, is a classic pairing.
I do love lavender roses. The foliage, like you were saying, is so beautiful against roses.
Oh, it's stunning. It's so
I love
I know. I go to England and I'm going to the garden and they've got lavender everywhere. I'm like, just shoot my head.
They are breeding for, they are breeding for more arid climate, for hotter zone lavenders. You can go and look on different sites and find the zone that you live in. But again, most lavenders do well in the cool, wet.
Yeah, they like that Mediterranean type thing. There's a Russian sage, Peruska. There's a dwarf version that I've been using around locally here when I do design gardens, and actually it resembles lavender, but it does really, really well.
And I know, Russian sedge is not bulletproof, but it's super tough. It can take those 6 months of 100+ degrees with very little care.
Yeah, and the nice thing is when you buy one plant, eventually have it like 10 or 12.
Y'all, I cannot believe we have been live for an hour already. I could just hang out with y'all all day talking about roses. Should we go ahead and announce our winners?
Over to you.
Our giveaways. Okay, so our lucky winners of the Jackson and Perkins roses. You each get one rose from jacksonperkins.com of your choice. Barbara Kelly. Congratulations, Barbara. So exciting. And Karina Isabella Abrahamson. Woo! So exciting. You guys can just DM the Jackson and Perkins Facebook page to claim your prize. And then our winner for a signed copy of Paul Zimmerman's book, Everyday Roses, that will be signed and shipped to you, is Kathy Sargent. Kathy, congratulations. So exciting. And thank you all for joining us today, hanging out, talking about roses.
Yeah, wonderful. That was a lot of, boy, that went fast.
I know. It literally flew by. I looked up and thought, oh my goodness, we could just talk and talk and talk.
And we did.
And we did. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for joining today.
Have fun.
Yeah.